You will be misunderstood by people who only believe their own perceptions. And perceptions, more often than not, are simply reflections, not of you, but of them, their experiences, their own fears, and their own insecurities. When you're disciplined, when you're capable and strong, when you can stand still in a storm without flinching, it unsettles people. They don't always understand it, so instead they label it. You've probably heard the words cold, intimidating, robotic, unapproachable. But here's the truth. Those reactions are mirrors. They're not measures. Mirrors of how your strength exposes what others have not yet mastered in themselves. Today, I want to talk about the audacity to be misunderstood and the courage to stay grounded when people misjudge your call, when they misjudge your pace, and when they misjudge your purpose and your intent. History and scripture are full of misunderstood people. Those were the change makers, people who were called before others could comprehend the why behind their what. David was one of them. He was anointed king as a teenager, yet what happened? He was sent right back to the field to tend sheep. He was overlooked by his father, and he was envied by a man who had it all. He was envied by King Saul. He was misunderstood by his own brothers who asked, "Why are you even here?" when he showed up to face Goliath. But see, David understood something many leaders forget. You do not need the understanding of others to validate the instruction of God. Even after he defeated Goliath, when the same people who doubted him started singing his praises, Saul did what? Saul grew jealous. David's victories didn't make him more understood. They made him more targeted. And still, David refused to retaliate. He played the harp for the very man who hunted him. He hid in a cave when he could have claimed the crown. Because David knew this: purpose cannot be rushed, and misunderstanding cannot be the reason enough to quit. Let me bring it even closer to home. During the height of COVID-19, I was serving as a campus administrator on an F-rated school campus. That meant the work was already hard. It was intense. It was intentional. It was extremely demanding. But what no one knew, except for my immediate team, was that I was walking through a storm that didn't make the news, but it was full of grief. In less than 10 months, I lost 11 family members and one close friend, aunts, uncles, cousins, people who poured into me as a child, people with whom I shared wonderful memories, people who I loved and who loved me. There was a stretch of time when every phone call, every text felt like a trigger, a reminder that grief had my number on speed dial. My supervisor attempted to advocate for me to secure me 5 days of bereavement. But guess what? It was denied. Still, I showed up every single day to campus because when you're a leader, you learn early that the work, it doesn't stop, even when your heart is quietly breaking behind closed doors. How many can relate to that? There were weeks when my entire administrative team was out due to contact tracing, and I was the only one on campus, supporting pre-K kids getting out of cars, unlocking doors, covering classes, figuring out spatial distancing during lunch, and managing the chaos, holding students and staff steady while quietly grieving behind the closed doors of my office. Months later, when people finally found out what I'd been walking through, one staff member looked at me and said, "You're like a robot." I just smiled because she didn't see the nights I cried in my car before walking into my home. She didn't see the mornings I prayed in the parking lot for strength simply to make it to lunch. She didn't see the faith it took to show up when everything around me was falling completely apart. I was literally barely there. She saw the discipline, but not the cost of it. She saw the steadiness, but not the sorrow behind it. And that's when I realized people often confuse steadiness with coldness. They mistake your stillness for indifference. But sometimes the only reason you look unshaken is because you've already survived earthquakes no one else knows about. A year later, the pandemic, it peaked again. At that time, I was working at the district level. We were deployed as helping hands to campuses that were experiencing high teacher absenteeism due to the rise of the pandemic. One day while serving in a high needs area, I was assaulted by a student. The impact left me with a blood clot in my left wrist. Most people would have taken weeks off, possibly even months. No one would have even questioned that decision. I took 2 days. And then I went back to the same exact campus, not because I didn't feel pain or fear, but because I didn't want trauma to rewrite the story of my calling. It was not going to be my period. I wanted redemption to hold the pen, not the pain, not the assault, not the impact. And when my supervisor asked if I wanted to be pulled indefinitely off that campus, I emphatically said, absolutely not. I just asked that someone come with me my first day back, to sit beside me, to help me breathe until I felt safe again. The manager in my department, she showed up. She sat with me, and I'll never forget her words. Most people wouldn't have come back, Misty. You're amazing at what you do. That moment wasn't about bravery. It was about alignment. See, when you're walking in purpose, pain doesn't get to dictate your next step. And here's the harder truth. When you're a woman who embodies that kind of strength, it's even less acceptable. A man who's decisive is called assertive. A woman who's decisive is called aggressive or difficult. A man who holds his head high in confidence is called simply confident. But a woman who holds her head high is called what? She's called intimidating. It's the same posture, but a different permission. And too often, women have to apologize for taking up the space that God already gave them. And then comes that word, tone. Tone becomes the catch-all for discomfort. It's not just how you sound, it's how you stand. It's how you think before you respond. It's the car you drive, the clothes you wear, the way you hold your head when you walk into a room. People don't even realize that what they call tone is often their reaction to confidence wrapped in calm. But you can't let that silence you, because if you keep dimming yourself to make others comfortable, you'll eventually disappear altogether, and others will call that peace. If we move from the pasture to the pulpit, let's talk about another leader who deeply was misunderstood, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Before he was the hero, we quote now, he was the man who was jailed. He was called too loud by some and too soft by others. Have you ever experienced that? Too spiritual for politicians and too political for the church. How many of you have ever lived in that tension? But what they couldn't see was that his discipline in peace was just as radical as in any protest. He refused to let anger define his movement. When he wrote Letter from a Birmingham Jail, it wasn't from a podium, it was from a prison cell, responding to other pastors who told him to do what? To wait. See, they misunderstood his urgency as impatience. But what he was really saying was this: when God gives you a call to move, waiting for man's comfort will always cost you purpose. His leadership reminds us that being misunderstood doesn't mean you're wrong. It often means you're just early. That's the tension of greatness. It's always ahead of its time. If you've ever been the one people didn't quite get, you're in perfect company. Maybe your calm is mistaken for indifference or coldness. Your focus is mistaken for aloofness or inconsideration, and your boundaries for arrogance. But here's the deeper truth. When you're called to something uncommon, you will always confuse the crowd because your obedience answers to heaven, not the consensus. Even Jesus was misunderstood by his disciples, by the Pharisees, and by his own hometown. Yet every misjudgment became a setup for what? For revelation. Every rejection was a redirection toward his full purpose. So here's what I want you to hold on to today. You don't need to be understood to be effective. You don't need to be liked to be anointed. And you don't need to explain what was never meant to be explained. Your discipline, your ability to stay in the storm, that's your strength. It's not robotic, it's rooted. It's not intimidating, it's intentional. So if they call you too much, stay steady. If they call you too quiet, stay focused. If they call you intimidating, smile and keep building. Because misunderstood doesn't mean misplaced, and rejection doesn't mean wrong direction. The truth is, the world has always been slow to understand divine assignments, but heaven has never been slow to honor obedience. So keep walking with integrity. Keep moving in purpose. Keep showing up even when it costs you comfort. If your heart is pure, if your intentions are anchored in truth, if your legacy speaks louder than the noise, then let the dogs bark. As my dad used to say to me all the time, let them bark because this train keeps on moving. So keep pushing forward because light, real light, will always disrupt darkness. And those who confront the status quo rarely find applause from the crowd. But that's the audacity of being misunderstood, to keep shining even when the world prefers shadows, to keep building when others doubt your blueprint, and to keep becoming when misunderstanding tries to define you. Pull up your chair and take a breath. And remember, you don't owe the world an explanation when you're walking in revelation. You were never called to perform for their approval. You were called to illuminate purpose. I'm Misty Green. Until next time, stay rooted, stay real, and have the audacity to be misunderstood.